Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Morton. My pronouns are she, her. I am the artist and studio manager here at Baltimore Clayworks, and we are thrilled that you all have joined us. I would like to acknowledge that I am joining from my office located on Piscataway and Susquehannock land, currently known as Baltimore, Maryland. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual artist talk given today by Kristyn Rohrer. Kristyn is a ceramic sculptor born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Through ceramic process, design, and storytelling, Kristyn takes ownership of their Mennonite upbringing and identity in creating their body of work, bringing a contemporary twist of the nostalgia of Pennsylvania Dutch culture. Kristyn received a BA in sociology with minors in ceramics and German from Kutztown University in 2018 and completed a ceramic arts post-baccalaureate program at West Virginia University in 2022. Kristyn has served as a resident artist at the Ampara Arts Cooperative in Morgantown, West Virginia, Ang Pottery in Baltimore, Maryland, and Kutztown University in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and interned at the Clay Studio in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Kristyn has exhibited ceramic work nationally since 2017 and will be the 2024 to 2025 Lormina Salter Fellow at Baltimore Clayworks. For more information about our artist talks, please visit our virtual library at baltimoreclayworks.org and tune in for our next artist talk with Megan Yarnell on November 11th from 4 to 4:30. I will now turn it over to Kristyn.
So thank you all for joining. Today, my name is Kristyn Rohrer. I'm a ceramic artist and long-term resident here at Baltimore Clayworks. And today I will be talking about a bit about my journey in clay, my process, my inspiration, and just sharing some of the pieces that fuel the concepts behind my current body of work. So as Rebecca said, I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I grew up on my family's farm and homestead here. These are just some pictures of our wheat fields. I made this plate this year before the wheat harvest. And growing up on a farm, and particularly growing up Mennonite, was something that's important to who I am culturally, even though I'm not necessarily religious. So it is something that is a significant part of my life and my worldview, and has actually become a pretty significant piece of my conceptual work for ceramics lately. So I went to school and undergrad at Kutztown University. In college is really where I fell in love with clay. I decided to pursue ceramics professionally after I took my first figure sculpture class. I really just loved the process of solid construction, building something solid, cutting it apart, carving it out, putting it back together, mending those seams so that there isn't even a scar visible, was a really cathartic process for me. So I actually kind of have used clay starting in this period and moving forward to just like process and reflect on my emotions and the world around me. So, kind of putting my energy, my feelings into something, into action, into creating something beautiful. So this was one of my favorite pieces that I did in my time in undergrad. So as Rebecca said, I actually did not major in art. I majored in sociology, which my studies were mostly focused on diversity and inequality across cultures. So I was studying, religion across cultures, gender across cultures, conflict, linguistic socialization, all these kind of topics. And I got the privilege to be able to travel to do research or studies or internships. And I found myself really drawn to Islamic art and architecture and culture. These pictures were actually all pictures I took during my junior year of college. I got to travel to Iran to research interfaith dialogue as an avenue for diplomacy between the US and Iran. So I was really drawn to all these mosques and shrines that I saw while I was there, kind of the way that Islamic art marries geometric and organic pattern and has this really just intricate placement that you you get lost. You're speechless. You have these buildings that are covered from head to toe, and it was just some of the most inspiring pieces I've ever seen. So kind of bringing in that like interfaith ideology into my worldview, which also has been seeping into my ceramics. So I wanted to give an example of how some of my sociological studies inform or kind of make their way into my art. So this was a piece that I made back in college, actually, after I returned home from interning in Jordan. I spent a summer there working at a sports camp for refugee girls. Jordan is, of course, very closely tied to Palestine. They're neighbors, but also a lot of Palestinian refugees live there, many that I worked with. My host family was Palestinian. And even back in 2018, when I made this piece, they were calling Gaza an open air prison, the most densely populated place in the world, under occupation for now over 50 years. And at the time on track to be uninhabitable by 2050, all before October 7th ever even happened. So I just wanted to kind of take a moment, as an artist, as a social scientist, as an American Mennonite and taxpayer, I feel compelled to shed light on this topic and kind of just open conversations through art to any injustice, and in particular this attempted genocide of the Palestinian people, then and now. So just wanted to take a moment to share a little bit of how my worldview and studies have kind of interacted with my art in this way. So after graduating undergrad, I was doing a lot of different things in my ceramics career. One of my favorites was working as a research assistant for Gwendolyn Yopolo, who is my professor at Kutztown. So we spent some time really testing rare earth oxide use in glazes and slips. Glaze research has really become an integral part of my practice, and I really fell in love with glaze chemistry and glaze testing by working with Gwendolyn. These are actually just some pictures of my own glaze tests. I do a lot of wet glaze mixing when I'm doing testing. So I have all these syringes in my studio. I do a lot of triaxles and line blends and ladder tests and kind of all these things to get me more intimately familiar with the materials I'm using, to really understand how these oxides and these colorants interact with each other. I love that ceramics really combines color theory and chemistry. You're not mixing purple and blue, you're mixing manganese dioxide and cobalt carbonate. So that kind of chemistry element, the mystery of that, the learning of that has really been a driver for me in my ceramics research. So 2020, age-old question, where were you when the world ended? So I was living in Baltimore, actually. I had gotten a job at an international development company called DAI. So I was, using my sociology degree, but I was living in Baltimore and commuting into Bethesda, Maryland. So in my car for like 3 hours every day. And I really didn't have time to dedicate to clay. I kind of took a pretty big break from it. And it wasn't till COVID hit that I, got to work from home, had a bad breakup and like needed a new change of pace in my life, and was like, I need to get back into clay. I just kind of needed it. And so I sought it out. I found a short-term residency at A&G Pottery in Fells Point. And that's kind of shot my, trajectory into pursuing my education in ceramics and in clay. So that brought me then to doing a postbac at WVU in 2020. So, which honestly was probably one of the greatest things I could have done for my ceramic practice at the time. I was really lucky that at WVU, I got to be kind of like a pseudo grad student, to really, take grad classes, be in grad critiques, and like learn about grad school and what it could be like without having to like sell my soul away to it, which I'm sure many of you who have gotten MFAs understand. But at WVU, I kind of started with more figure. Figure is definitely my kind of comfy place and where I love to be in clay. So we're starting doing a lot of hands, which are kind of my favorite element of figure to sculpt. I think hands are so expressive. They tell so many stories and are really almost like a figure in and of themselves. So that was kind of my starting point at WVU. So then it was in these grad critiques, and our professors would ask us almost every crit, where are you in this work? What makes this work uniquely made by you? What stories are you telling? So I was thinking about these questions during this time. And of course, it was also, kind of reflecting on my life at the time, which this was peak COVID, 2020, 2021. And I was thinking a lot about my family. My grandparents were passing away, some from COVID. And I was just feeling this like palpable generational shift, this like sense of loss of culture, really, of being connected to my Mennonite upbringing, which is something that honestly I thought I kind of got over like in college and like separated myself from a bit. But it wasn't until kind of some time had passed and like these things were happening with my family that I didn't realize how intimately growing up Mennonite was like tied to my sense of self. So that's when this kind of intersection of my identity and culture and art and religion started popping up into my work. So I was really looking at some Pennsylvania Dutch art, that I grew up with and grew up around as, inspiration for what I was doing. So this picture on the left is a quilt that my grandmother made. The braided rug in the middle is also, she would make all of these braided rugs. They're all over my parents' house. And then Frochter is actually an old Pennsylvania Dutch calligraphy kind of style. And so I started making some of my own kind of little Frochter pieces reminiscent of those old art forms. So I was making these pieces and also kind of drawing, from quilts, right? And trying to like elevate quilts off of the bed and onto the wall. Creating these ornate frames to really show reverence, to show an element of protection, that quilts were something that were worth more than just being an everyday object. They're a work of art to be like celebrated and protected and praised. So kind of looking at these art forms as something that's like homey and nostalgic, but also something that's precious. These quilts, they show labor, intense labor, hand labor, which is also, kind of reminiscent of these other, Islamic arts that I'm really drawn to, that have these intricacies of pattern and color and repetition, and just seeing kind of how these things relate to each other, but have somewhat of an interfaith dialogue conversation within the art form. So also in this series, I was kind of looking at different materials to bring into my practice. I was playing with, this piece in particular has a ceramic frame, and then on the inside is fabric with hand-stitched embroidery and then mirrors. So I was looking at mirrors as a symbol of vanity, wherein, like Pennsylvania Dutch culture, modesty is really at the forefront. And, kind of having that image of vanity seems a bit blasphemous. Whereas in, maybe Persian culture, you see these shrines and they're covered in mirrors. But the mirrors aren't a symbol of vanity. They're a symbol of a reflection of light, a window to the divine. So kind of like looking at these different faith traditions and like pulling the pieces of them that felt good to me and felt interesting, and kind of like putting them together in conversation with one another. So for my final critique at WVU, I decided to kind of expand the way I was engaging with storytelling in my ceramic practice. I wanted to find creative ways to open conversation around the intersectionality of society, religion, politics, and art. So this piece I made, it's called How Can I Keep From Singing? I was reflecting on this family story that my dad told me when he was a kid back in the 60s, and his uncles had formed this Mennonite quartet. It was during this time where there were some significant breaks and splits in the Mennonite community. So kind of reflecting on this story, I sat down with my parents over like the Easter holiday that year, and I just recorded hours of a conversation. We just like sat down at the kitchen table and we talked about this story, but of course, as conversation goes, like divulged into all these other topics around, pride and conformity, identity, discipline, the treatment of women in the Mennonite community, breaks in the community, Mennonites as, like a dying culture, and this generational change as we're kind of entering this new wave, new era of Christian nationalism in the United States. So these were all kind of topics that were coming up in this piece that I was making. So just a little close up, kind of see a better picture of these pieces. I made 4 like large ceramic hand mirrors, and then each has like a tiny mirror on the inside. And each mirror has a different audio component, kind of audio excerpt of this conversation I had with my parents. And the audio is like on loop. You put headphones on and you kind of enter into the conversation, which is almost like you're walking into our living room as we're talking. Then visually, each of these mirrors is kind of stylized with reminiscent of Proctor songbook plates. So there's this hymn that stretches across the four mirrors. It says, "What though my joys and comforts die, I catch the sweet though far off hymn. How can I keep from singing?" So this is a piece I hope maybe I'll get the chance to show at Clayworks sometime, because it's really, an auditory and visual medium. So that was one of the pieces that I had in my final critique at WVU. Another piece that I had was called Shrine to Dutch Blitz. So Dutch Blitz is actually a Pennsylvania Dutch card game. And so I created this performance piece around this game. So I have this ceramic object, which is pictured on the left. It's kind of like a shrine-like wall hanging that's meant to go like above a kitchen table. And then I had this table that I brought out and put playing cards on. And then I have a spoken word performance that I kind of did in this setting. So I was really using this card game and the places where I've played it to paint a picture of my conflicting relationship that I have with my own Mennonite identity. So this piece is kind of meant for anyone who has a complicated relationship with religion or where they come from, who's maybe wrestling with feelings of pride or shame, and kind of particularly around for queer people or women. So this is a piece that I'm also interested in kind of remaking and rediscovering what different ways I can show this and how I can show this. I've done it at some artist talks or events, but is a fun way to explore storytelling in ceramics as well. So after I finished my time at WVU, I ended up staying in Morgantown. I had a lot of friends who were in grad school and living together. So I ended up joining the Nampara Arts Cooperative, which is run by a WVU alum, Jamie Lester, who is a ceramic figure sculptor. So during this time, I was really challenging myself as like a working artist to make more utilitarian and personal sculptures for people to be able to kind of sell work and be an active member of the arts community in Morgantown. So I started doing that, kind of drawing more on these like wall quilts that I was making, this intricate hand painting that really like ideally draws you in to look at the detail, bringing gold luster in to really make those things pop, to really elevate them as a precious object, and even having some allusions to stained glass. This is another piece that was in this series, was probably just my favorite of this mini series I did. I really liked kind of marrying the frame of this piece with what was inside of the hearts on the quilt. And it was actually kind of inspired by a couple different quilts and embroidery pieces that my grandmothers on both sides of my family made. Although I'm not a potter, I'd say I made a lot of plates, and plates were a really great way for me to connect with the community in Morgantown, to make my art more accessible, and to just experiment with color and pattern in a different way. I think as an artist, I've wrestled sometimes between, making work for a gallery setting, for an experience or to start a conversation, versus art that's maybe like a personal handmade object that is accessible, is just an object of beauty to be sold to adorn someone's home. So I think there's a lot of different avenues to take as an artist, so whether you want to be an advocate in more of a space or start conversations or just adorn homes. But I think clay has a beautiful way of doing all of these things. So it's been fun to make objects that I know that I can learn from anything that I make. So with these plates, I was doing, a lot of experiments with surface design, and then hopefully then moving that learning into larger sculptures that I was working on. So just a little kind of process highlight. So the plates that I was making, I tend to use a mishima technique, which mishima is a Japanese slip inlay technique. There are different ways to do it, but the way that I do mishima is I have these handmade stamps that I either carve clay and then bisque them or make plaster molds. But some of them I actually use cake decorating tools to kind of create the lace patterns. But I roll out a slab and I stamp it kind of like a little quilt block. And I'm using like a darker stoneware kind of body. And then I paint a white slip over top of it to just fill in those recessed areas. And then you get a really nice contrast when you kind of wipe it away. So I use that Mishima technique on this plate set that I made. So this set was actually in last year's Strictly Functional Pottery National Show. And I was thinking a lot about gender identity making this piece, my own gender identity, the intersection of gender and religion, and honestly, the heightened inflammatory rhetoric and attack on trans people in this country, particularly using trans people as a political weapon around our election cycle. So this piece is called Trans Barn Raising. One, because of course the colors of the trans flag, the blue, white, pink. And then barn raising actually alludes to the specific log cabin quilt block pattern that these plates are arranged in. So kind of combining these things, making, like a trans Mennonite quilt seems like a very antithetical idea. But I think that can open a conversation around these things that feel unaligned, like queerness and religion, which just, I think, is a lot of interesting topics that can come up out of ceramic work. So then this past year, kind of leading up to my move to Baltimore and getting my residency at Clayworks, I've been trying to kind of bring all these things together, all my learning from West Virginia, and getting back into figure sculpture. So figure is always my love. I'm always going to be making figure, but it's been nice to kind of take all of that surface and glaze research and then put it into a new sculpture. So kind of combining those things to tell new sides of my story. I also think figure just really places emphasis on brings social psychology into the conversation of a work. So I love that kind of emotive quality that automatically grounds you when you see a figure in an art form. So this piece in particular, another one where I was processing as I was making it. I was kind of going through a difficult event in my life and processing some anger and shame around an incident that I ended up listening to the song Paint the Town Red by Doja Cat on loop as I was making this piece. And I feel like that energy really fueled into it. So for me, that song was really a lot about reclaiming a feminine power at a time when I felt like I kind of lost a lot of my agency. And just kind of thinking about these barriers that I have to, physical and sexual intimacy as someone who grew up Mennonite, and kind of what those things were as I was processing this piece in my life. So just to round out, I started my residency here at Clayworks. So far, I've been making a lot of cups and did the beer steins and wine goblets for the Oktoberfest Invitational. But I'm really excited moving forward to continue kind of pushing the boundaries of storytelling in clay, making bigger work, making more political work, and just filling space with objects that are both beautiful and thought-provoking. So yeah, thank you.